and pioneer solutions that can get scaled up. And today, with, I think, the most climate progressive president we've ever had, the one with the most tons of emissions reductions under his belt and the most appetite to do more. Even with that, our states and our cities and our towns and our county commissioners, and this isn't just true in the United States, it's going to be true all around the world, are our key ingredient, both in implementing federal programs and in pursuing greater ambition to reduce emissions. That's absolutely critical, so very grateful for your leadership, Governor. Look, even as we press to phase out our reliance on fossil fuels, we must work to clean up existing operations rapidly and rigorously, and today's announcement does just that. What's hopefully important context for this announcement, and speaking of governors, Governor Schwarzenegger once called the EPA administrator the pollution terminator. I love that. And I think today's announcement shows he's living up to that reputation. But today's announcement from the EPA, and I remember being in a room just like this one a year ago, and a lot of you asked, well, would we go after routine flaring? Would we take on super emitters? Would we be able to deploy the most innovative technology in pursuit of this ambition? The answer from the pollution terminator and Joe Biden's EPA administrator is yes, and emphatically so. To put it in context for what it means for climate math for the United States, this is 130 million metric tons of emissions reduction just in 2030. For those of you who don't stay up at night calculating our path to 50 to 52%, let me do some math for you. That amounts to almost 2% of our annual emissions, helping close that gap even further and moving us along the trajectory we need to be on. And it's not just EPA acting alone. Joe Biden's and Kamala Harris's approach to tackling climate change has been from day one an all-in, all-cabinet, all-out effort to chase down every last bit of pollution and every last bit of economic opportunity that we can unlock for the American people. So this action today is part of over 100 actions taken by the Biden-Harris administration over the last year, just over the last year, to implement the U.S. methane emissions reduction action plan. And to give you a few examples, in May, our Department of Transportation, under Secretary Buttigieg's leadership, announced a rule that would help improve the performance of 2.7 million miles of pipeline, patching up leaks that create danger for our communities, literal physical risk, and capturing those emissions at the same time. Just this past year, we deployed $1 billion to cap abandoned wells, 10,000 of them all across the United States of America. So remember, we came here the first COP under the Biden administration. We were negotiating the infrastructure law at the time. A lot of folks said, you probably won't pass it. Well, we did. The next COP, we came back, we just passed the Inflation Reduction Act. This COP, we come back and our message is this: we are implementing it. And the proof is now showing up in communities all across America. $850 million to reclaim abandoned mines, deployed last year, not promised, deployed last year. And working with NASA and the International Space Station, 800 plumes identified over the course of 16 months, forming the data environment that allows us to go after these leaks. And it's not just in the oil and gas sector. In the last year, we deployed $130 million to go after food waste, which drives methane emissions. So here's an opportunity to boost food security, to tackle climate emissions, and create economic opportunity at the same time. $700 million deployed last year to capture agricultural methane. Cows, they fart, you catch the emissions, and you can turn those emissions into electricity. In the United States, we're investing in that, and that's creating what was just literally cow farts, is turning into a revenue stream for farmers and ranchers all across the United States. That's the kind of opportunity we're talking about. And what's exciting to me is, in this venue in particular, is that this 100 actions taken over the last year that show what it looks like to implement this aggressive and ambitious playbook is not just about what happens in the United States of America. By setting standards that build a massive and certain market for the technologies that we need to reduce methane emissions, we're going to drive down the technology costs to deploy those technologies, and we're going to facilitate capital formation hungry to deploy that technology all around the world. And that same theory of the case is part and parcel of the Inflation Reduction Act, which we know will reduce technology costs by up to a quarter, not just for U.S. benefit, but for deployment all around the world. So we are, I think you can tell, incredibly excited about the work being announced by the EPA today under Administrator Regan's leadership, the work we do in partnership with our governors and our mayors all across the United States, and to something Governor Lujan Grisham said, to show a playbook where tackling this emergency situation boosts economic opportunity and brings everybody together, unions, industry, and environmental NGOs. And lead among the latter is Fred Krupp, so I'll pass it over to him.
Thanks, Ali. First of all, I want to congratulate you, Administrator Regan, and the Biden administration for establishing these very protective standards that are going to substantially reduce oil and gas methane pollution, both at new and also at the older existing facilities. EPA's sensible protections address one of the single largest sources of climate destabilizing pollution in the United States and the world. It's about 30% of our current global warming is caused due to human-caused methane from the oil and the oil and gas industry is the largest source of methane in the United States. 30% is from all human-caused sources of methane. So these predictions, which, as Administrator Regan said, will reduce 58 million tons of methane pollution in the current year. What does that mean? To get the same amount of temperature reductions from business as usual as we'll get from 58 million tons of methane, it would be like taking 1 billion cars off the road for a whole year. In terms of the near term, the effect you'd see in the first 20 years after taking that action, it is a model for methane leadership. And I want to pick up on one point you said, Ali, which is so right, and it was driven home to me yesterday. I was talking to a nationally owned oil company from the developing world, and I had a whole agenda. All they wanted to ask me about was, what is EPA going to announce? Because what the United States, as the biggest oil-producing nation in the world, what the United States does in terms of standards is what the rest of the world looks. So why have you chosen, Mr. Regan, to announce this here? Because this is not only going to affect oil and gas in the United States, it's going to be influential in affecting how oil and gas is produced everywhere around the world. So that's globally. How about locally? In the United States, there's within 1 mile of oil and gas facilities, 18 million people live. And when the methane comes out upstream, what else comes out? All sorts of toxic stuff. That's a nice way to say it. And so when the EPA reduces methane emissions upstream, as this rule will, it's reducing the toxic stuff that's coming out and literally poisoning people and creating smog. So it's not only good for the world, what Administrator Regan and EPA are doing in putting these protections in place is good for people who live locally. It's just common sense. Cost-effective measures like requiring people to go out and check for leaks periodically. It's just common sense. It's not really expensive. And it produces big results. Replacing the seals around compressors, they wear out. So require them to be replaced every few years and you stop these leaks. Cut the amount of flaring. What does that do? Well, it turns out, yes, a flare can combust 99% of methane, but often if they're not maintained, they only combust 89%. So you get 10% leaking, or the flare goes out and it's not automatically relit. It can be out. We've flown over flares that have been out for weeks. And when they're out, they're just venting methane. So this is what the regulation in the real world is going to prevent. Administrator Regan, your colleagues in the APA have shown tremendous leadership in adopting these protections. And we look forward to working with you, the EPA, and the states to get these rules implemented so these safeguards are in place soon for communities all around the country. From the bottom of my heart, thank you.
Thank you. Take a few questions from the press. Start with Lisa. Maybe the microphone.
Sure. Hi, Lisa Friedman from the New York Times. Thank you for doing this. Question for Administrator Reagan and maybe a question for Ali. Administrator, can you talk about why it's been relatively easier to address methane and had success working with industry as opposed to carbon dioxide emissions? And for Ali, there's been a lot of criticism from developing countries that while the U.S. has been acting on climate at home, it's been a laggard on international climate finance. Can you explain why the U.S. pledge for the Loss and Damage Fund was so much less than other countries like the UAE and Germany that put up $100 million? Thanks.
Well, I'll start, Lisa, by saying, number one, I think that the focus on methane and the reduction of methane emissions has been one that has been going on for, quite a number of years. And we were able to leverage a lot of work that has been done previously, but also there's a reason that the governor and Fred are on the stage, which is they have been leaders in this field, and we've been able to take some aspects of their blueprints, bring everyone to the table, and create successful and very aggressive technology standard. This is probably one of the most innovative standards EPA has ever produced. I think the field of technologies applicable to reducing methane for this industry are here and continue to grow. We take all of that into account. And so we've been able to really leverage what leading organizations like Environmental Defense Fund has been able to do and show and demonstrate with satellite technology. We've been able to leverage the real benefits that we're seeing on the ground in states under leadership like Governor Lujan Grisham. And quite frankly, leadership matters. And the president has really forced us to take a look at how we can do this in a way where we reduce the environmental disbenefits, the public health disbenefits, leverage technology, stay focused on job creation, and we have historic legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act to complement this regulatory action to allow for us to really be as aggressive as we have. So it's just really an exciting time for this industry in particular, but I also would say that we are having a lot of success working with the industry on our cars and trucks and heavy duty, and we're continuing to keep the power sector at the table as well. So more to be said on that at a later date. And I'll turn it over to Ali.
As a collective, I think that we've all got to make immense progress both on reducing emissions and being a strong and faithful partner to folks facing down the impacts of a changing climate all around the world. That's why central to the Paris Agreement, one of the elements was the mobilization of capital, $100 billion target set that the OECD has tracked against and noted progress in terms of meeting. But we have to keep building on top of that. The President has deployed under his leadership capital into the Green Climate Fund, which continues to strengthen its practices and increase its reach and impact. The U.S. has been a partner engaging with this COPS dialogue on helping establish the mechanisms and what will be a startup entity within the bank to address loss and damage. And I think we've got a really strong track record as an administration setting that ambition of over $11 billion for climate finance. I think you'll hear from us over the course of this COP the progress we're making just in this calendar year that, at least for us, gives us confidence that we're on track and the right trajectory to meet that very ambitious target. But look, there's an incredible amount of work that needs to be done in this space, and we need to work as an administration not only to galvanize solutions, both public and privately financed, here on the global stage, but to galvanize the political economy in the U.S. on the domestic side, to see the interconnectedness of the climate crisis with global security issues. These are intertwined matters. In rooms across this complex, folks will be talking about how climate puts stress and strain on violence and extremism, how climate puts pressure and strain on trends around migration. We have to see these as interconnected, interrelated issues. We continue to make that case domestically, and we continue to lead on that internationally. And the work's not done. We will continue to reach higher.
Thank you. It's Jack Dutton from our Monitor. My question is for Ali. What is the Biden administration doing to increase the transparency of the fossil fuel industry, including the US shale majors? And what can countries in this region of the world, some of which are ramping up production capacity of their oil, learn from the Biden administration's approach?
So transparency is a critical first element in the right direction. We got to understand what the nature of the problem is, and then we start to tackle it. If you rewind in time in U.S. public policy, it took us a few years of collecting data and information collection requests that helped lay the foundation for understanding what the scope and scale of the methane problem was. And now we're doing the next thing, the important thing, which is to figure out how we rigorously and systematically reduce those emissions. That's got to be the case in both public policy and in, I think, effective discharge of fiduciary duties. And I think you're seeing this in the capital markets, increasing demand not just for transparency and disclosure, but also for clarity around how entities are going to manage this risk and reduce that risk in a in a systematic fashion. To me, what that looks like is, number one, on the transparency side, having really clear rules of accounting on the disclosure of Scope 1, Scope 2, and frankly, also Scope 3 emissions. That helps us get our arms around not just the problem, but also the opportunity. The second is creating the incentive environment for strong decision making to bend the curve on all of those. In the United States, through the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in climate clean energy, not just in U.S. history, but the world, we are creating that incentive environment. And I think as a result, we're seeing balance sheets that were for too long leveraged only to increase emissions now look at, or in best case scenarios, pivot to deploying clean energy solutions. But the measure here is not going to be the gloss of the greenwash. The measure here is going to be the reduction in emissions and the gigawatts of clean capacity that's deployed. We have to be clear-eyed and relentless about that.
And I'd just like to add on the transparency, if I can, for the panel. With the standard set of rules implemented by the feds, case in point, New Mexico, like we do any number of dashboards so that you can see what's going on, including our accountability measures. And I've got, like I said, Secretary Kenny here, and in short order, we're looking at a way that on your cell phone, any New Mexican can tell where a methane leak is and how long it takes us to resolve that particular problem. We have to do that universally. We can't do it unless we have this. We have apples to apples. And quite frankly, this is the only way to do that, is to have a federal framework. So for us in particular, while all states love bragging rights, so thank you very much, this is excellent. We can't do our part to support the nation unless we're all doing it similarly, and then we have data points that are meaningful, because without that, we don't. And that is, I think, just as important and critical to the commitments that the U.S. is making on all fronts.
We're just a little over time, so we're not able to take any more questions, but we're happy to grab a couple, take any follow-ups, press account that you can run to press at EPA.gov. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
You shall will.